Got to get my right comments here. So welcome everybody. Good morning to our panelists and guests. The purpose of today's hearing is to highlight the importance of foreign direct investment in the United States and learn more from our experts on how lowering barriers to foreign investment in our country can have significant benefits for our economy as a whole. I hate to steal the Undersecretary's thunder, but his testimony lays out some of the facts that deserve being mentioned more than once. In 2010, U.S. affiliates of foreign firms employed over 5.3 million workers. As I understand, that's now 5.6 as of today. And the average salaries are $77,000 per year. These firms accounted for $41.3 billion worth of research and development efforts and $149 billion worth of capital expenditures in that same year. In the manufacturing sector alone, FDI inflows were nearly $84 billion in 2012, according to the National Association of Manufacturers. These statistics tell us a clear story. Increasing capital in the form of direct foreign investment has positive effects on manufacturing, increased exports, job creation, and U.S. competitiveness. It's just that simple. Unfortunately, these rosy statistics fail to tell the whole story. Foreign direct investment in the United States has fallen drastically over the last few years relative to other nations. According to the testimony we'll hear today from the Organization for International Investment, the U.S. share of foreign direct investment has dropped from 41% in '99 to 17% in 2011. The reality is that while the U.S. remains an economic leader, the other nations are catching up. The statistic I just mentioned is indicative of that. Companies want to manufacture in a country where there is fair corporate tax code, a high degree of regulatory certainty, and a set of policies that welcome investments into the country. The United States can't rest on its laurels. We need to take a hard look at some of our national policies and assess whether they're stunting our ability to attract companies to the U.S. that have proven they create jobs and will help grow our economy. The legislation that we'll be introducing in the following days, the Global Investment in American Jobs Act of 2013, is just the first step in that process. Given that we'll learn in today's hearing from a panel of experts, and we have heard in our last three meetings focused on manufacturing, that this should be a no-brainer. Investing in American jobs is not a partisan issue when companies like Toyota and Honda choose to open up manufacturing facilities in Kentucky, or Texas, or Tennessee, or Ohio, or South Carolina, or Georgia. We noticed Nebraska wasn't on there. Neither was Illinois, so there's room for improvement.
Yes.
We heard from some of our executives just last week that when they opened the doors, thousands of jobs were created directly and indirectly. Local, state, and federal tax revenues went up, not because marginal rates went up, but because of the economies in those cities and states grew and more people were working. We heard from these companies how they helped change the communities they became part of, contributing through outreach programs like workforce training and charitable giving. If our legislation, the Global Investment in American Jobs Act of 2013, can succeed in highlighting what the U.S. needs to do and keep and attract more of our great companies to our shores, then it's a win-win for every American and workers. The U.S. can still be one of the most attractive places in the world to invest capital. We have a large and affluent consumer base, a strong rule of law when it comes to intellectual property, and one of the best and most productive workforces in the world. It's my hope that today's hearing can help us highlight some areas where barriers on foreign direct investment currently exist so that we can build upon the positives I just mentioned and not only compete for, but win the opportunities for foreign direct investment. I want to thank all of our panelists for coming here today, and especially Mr. Sanchez, thank you for being here as well. You're a key part of this effort and have done well. So I yield back the rest of my time and now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Jen Schakowsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm hoping that we can keep our run of bipartisan hearings and work. We got a good string going so far. I thank you for holding this hearing on draft legislation to attract further foreign investment in the United States. I welcome the witnesses, especially Mr. Sanchez this morning as our first panelist, and look forward to all of the testimony. In the interest of promoting good jobs and overall economic growth, I agree that we should consider ways to increase investment in this country, both domestic and foreign. The United States is the global leader in attracting foreign direct investment. There is more foreign direct investment in America than anywhere else, and we're consistently ranked as #1 of the easiest places to do business. There is a strong incentive to invest in America. Our economy is continuing to recover from the Great Recession, and we remain the best place on earth to find talented, motivated employees. In order to access all that our country has to offer, foreign investors know that they will be required to meet labor, health, environmental, and consumer standards. Strong standards protect workers and the communities in which these foreign investments occur, and they are essential for long-term economic growth in this country. Our economy is built on the middle class and those who aspire to it, and it is imperative that our attempts to expand foreign investment strengthen rather than undermine worker protections, compensation, and job security. Just as the best American companies observe high labor standards, so must foreign investors understand that a well-compensated and well-protected workforce will drive the future growth of their corporations and our overall economy. It's imperative that foreign investors respect our local, state, and federal environmental protections. I believe that climate change is the greatest challenge we face as a planet and as a nation. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions, protecting our waterways from harmful toxins and chemicals, and shifting toward cleaner energy sources is essential if we are to thrive for generations to come. Our effort to encourage foreign direct investment should align with our efforts to combat climate change and help us transition to a clean energy future. Finally, it is essential that we maintain restrictions on foreign investment in industries that are critical to public safety, national security, and a strong domestic workforce. Those restrictions help ensure the safety of the American people and the security of American jobs. I listed some of the things that I'm concerned about in foreign investment, but I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how we can continue to drive foreign direct investment in the United States that promotes good jobs, a clean environment, and the security of the American people. And I want to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Barrow.
I thank the ranking member for her time. I appreciate it. I co-sponsored this bill in the last Congress because it's a step in the right direction to grow American jobs. Every time I go home, I'm reminded of how investors overseas can spur jobs here at home by tapping into the infrastructure and workforce we have right here in America. Belgian companies like Solvay and Augusta, French companies like Alstom and Waynesboro, and Irish companies like Covidien in Augusta can invest in any country in the world. They're proud to invest in Georgia's 12th district, and the families who work for them take just as much pride in their work. We have the best workers in the world, and we like it when companies all over the world compete for workers in Georgia. I'll continue supporting job-creating efforts like this and look forward to today's hearing. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Very good. No other requests for opening statements, so Mr. Sanchez, we will recognize you for 5 minutes.
Is that better? Oh, that's a lot better. Distinguished members of the committee, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today about the Department of Commerce's work to attract and retain business investment in the United States. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I will summarize my statement and submit my full testimony for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, I want to thank the committee and the members of the House who have introduced legislation focusing on global investment. This is a clear recognition of how important the role that, that foreign direct investment plays in strengthening our economy. Such an effort reinforces a very simple truth, that as a free market economy, the United States encourages investment from both domestic and foreign sources, and that this investment leads to economic growth and job creation. In 2010, which was until this morning the latest available data we had, U.S. subsidiaries of foreign-owned firms employed 5.3 million U.S. workers. As Chairman Terry just recognized, that number now is up to 5.6 million. And what's really important, I think, is that these are high-paying jobs with an average compensation of over $77,000 per year. And these firms also spend tens of billions of dollars expanding their facilities, purchasing equipment, and investing in research and development that keeps our economy at the cutting edge of innovation. So the bottom line, increasing the investment of attracted and retained investment to the U.S. is absolutely critical to growing our economy. And the good news is that the United States is the world's largest recipient of foreign direct investment. Companies from around the world choose to do business here in the United States and take advantage of the unparalleled business climate, which includes our innovative and stable market, a skilled and well-educated workforce, strong intellectual property rights protection and enforcement, and a stable regulatory climate. In addition, the United States has trade agreements with 20 markets, giving firms with U.S. operations access to a global marketplace. In short, the U.S. is a great place to do business. Nevertheless, as the chairman pointed out, economies worldwide, as they open up and liberalize, we are now faced from these other economies increased competition to attract new investment projects and retain existing ones. Our states, regions, and local communities need a federal advocate to help win new investments. Because we are now competing with at least 159 countries that have investment promotion programs, and on average, these programs spend about $58 million annually. In this new climate, the U.S. needs to be actively engaged in foreign direct investment, making Select USA a valuable initiative. President Obama launched Select USA in 2011 as a first-ever U.S. government-wide initiative to promote and facilitate business investment in the United States. Select USA's unique services complement states' efforts and provide federal information and ombudsman services to firms seeking to invest, seeking to remain here, seeking to expand, or in many cases now return to the United States. And this work is generating results. Since June of 2011, Select USA has responded to over 600 investor inquiries, assisted with over 100 ombudsman cases, and counseled nearly 140 U.S. cities, states, and regions. And that is just the start. We aim to build on this momentum in a variety of ways. One vehicle will be for Select USA to host an investment summit from October 31st to November 1st right here in Washington, D.C. The Select USA Investment Summit is designed to highlight the benefits of the U.S. business climate to investors and help them engage with U.S. economic development organizations. In addition, Select USA will work to keep pace with the increase in investment, inquiries, cases, and, we hope, many successes. It will also continue to leverage the partnerships and relationships that we have with other federal agencies, as well as creating new ones. The Commerce Department will continue to do all that it can to attract and retain business investment. I want to take a moment to thank the other agencies that have been diligently working to strengthen this initiative, and I want to thank you again for the opportunity to discuss this important topic. I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. At this point, we'll start our questions, and I really do appreciate you being here. It meant
Thank you, Mr.
a lot to us. And so your statement was very strong about the need and the importance of direct foreign investment, and I appreciate the strength of that statement. So You agree that we should take a look at approaches to make U.S. more competitive in attracting these foreign companies to invest here. That's your mission, right?
That's part of our mission, is to make sure we maintain a competitive business climate.
Yeah. Does the Commerce Department currently have any expertise in evaluating policies that affect our competitiveness in the marketplace? In the world marketplace in attracting foreign investment?
One of the things that the International Trade Administration has, that's the business unit that I have the privilege of overseeing, is manufacturing and services. And it does a lot of outreach to our business sectors. And so we're constantly interacting with them, getting feedback from them on what's working and what's not working. And we try to keep that dialogue going constantly, and as we learn that, share it with relevant agencies.
So with that type of collaboration, you feel comfortable that you could provide us a study of where we can improve or remove barriers?
Well, we certainly, we're not the only agency that can contribute to that, but we certainly have a lot to say on it, and we would welcome the opportunity to be a part of that dialogue.
I appreciate that. Now, who would, if a study like this is undertaken, who would you rely on in your staff to help piece this together?
Well, we have a number.
Is he sitting here today, or she?
I think part of that team.
I think the
probably,
one with the grin is probably, yeah.
The one who's feeling the weight of the new task. I'm sure part of that team is right here in this room. We would probably draw on a number of people within the International Trade Administration, but I suspect we would want to draw on other relevant business units within the Department of Commerce, including NIST, PTO, Bureau of Economic Analysis, as well as reaching out to other relevant agencies.
Well, I would appreciate that. And 180 days, do you feel that that's an appropriate time period? What's your feedback?
Mr. Chairman, I probably would want to look at the scope of the study before I gave you a specific number, but we would certainly, if Congress mandated us to do that, we would certainly make every effort to provide a good study within the time requested.
Fair. You went through a series of numbers, or the number of countries that we compete with is what, 160, did you say?
Well, there are at least 159 that have active investment promotion programs, and the average budget for those programs is about $58 million.
So do you have any initial beliefs of where we should focus to remove barriers or become stronger, ways to strengthen our ability to attract the foreign investment into the United States?
As I mentioned in my testimony, we already start with a good, attractive business climate. If you look at indicators that are put out by the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and other groups, we consistently rank most often in the top 5, perhaps sometimes in the top 10, as one of the best places to do business. So we fortunately start from a very good place. One of the things that we have to do, and this is why Select USA was launched, is we have to recognize that more and more countries are seeking in foreign investment. And so we can no longer just rest on our laurels. We can no longer just say, look, we're a great place to do business, come. We have to actively promote. And I think that's one of the areas that we need to really pay attention to, and that's what Select USA seeks to do. And your attention through this legislation to this effort is indicative that you and this committee recognize that.
Well, and in that regard of working in a collaborative way, you mentioned in your statement with Select USA of working with the states. What do you feel the states' roles are, and what have you seen from the experience of trying to attract foreign investment? How are the states doing? What should they be doing better? Who's doing best?
Well, I think, and I believe this is the philosophy of Select USA, is that the states have the primary role of promoting foreign direct investment. That has been their role. It should continue to be. And Select USA should be more of a facilitator, a supporter of those efforts. So there are things that we are able to do that helps them. For example, Select USA is leveraging the offices that the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service have in 72 countries around the world and 100 cities here in the United States. And that's an important value added that we provide. Most states don't have that kind of coverage. In fact, no state that I know of has that coverage. My home state of Florida has 14 offices abroad, and I believe that's the largest grouping of offices that any state has anywhere in the world. So presence outside of the United States is very important. Helping them reach out as we get leads, connecting them to the economic development organizations. So I think these are the kinds of things that we play a very good complementary role with the states.
Thank you very much. And my time has expired, and now recognize the ranking member, Jen Schakowsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Before I begin our hearing, I want to say congratulations. I understand that you're among a short list of candidates being considered for the United States Trade Representative, and I wish you the very best of luck.
You're very kind. Thank you very much.
I have a question about greenfield investment, new investment versus merger and acquisitions. Preparing for this hearing presented us with some conflicting information. On the one hand, we're told that the reason that we need to do this study and to promote foreign direct investment is because the United States is losing investment, as our chairman pointed out, losing investment opportunities to other countries such as Mexico and India, developing countries. I would agree that we should be concerned if that is the case and we need to promote the U.S. as the best place to invest. Now, on the other hand, the most recent data available indicates that 85% or more of the foreign direct investment occurs through mergers and acquisitions. So if the vast majority of FDI is used to acquire pre-existing United States businesses that were previously owned by Americans, I'm less clear about the benefits. In many cases, a large foreign firm is expanding into the United States by buying out smaller U.S. businesses. In these situations, the end result is often either the same number of jobs or even somewhat fewer jobs. In fact, a recent study concluded that despite the productivity gain that's associated with foreign ownership, any dollar of foreign direct investment from merger and acquisition sales has a weaker effect on growth than a dollar of foreign investment that stems from greenfield investment, which occurs when an investor builds a new productive unit from scratch. So my question is, if you could tell me what the Department of Commerce is doing, what you're doing, your administration is doing to distinguish between these two types of foreign direct investment, and what changes could be made to the draft legislation so it focuses more intensively on greenfield investment.
Thank you very much, Representative Schakowsky, and again, thank you for your kind words at the start of your question. Select USA starts with a premise that the United States has an open investment environment. And I agree with you that new investment that creates new jobs is very, very appealing, and we have had the privilege through Select USA of working with a number of companies that have made investments. I would also, those kinds of investments, I would also point out, however, that oftentimes there are investments being made acquiring companies that can use that added revenue, or in some cases, if they don't get that revenue, those businesses might shut down. And so attracting foreign direct investment that takes over an existing company isn't always a net negative. In many cases, it's a net positive. And so we look at it more broadly, that we're attracting investment, and that investment does a number of things. They often buy new equipment. They often expand facilities. They then, in turn, often add to our exports because what they manufacture here often then gets re-exported. So we will continue to focus on supporting investment here that our hope is will add to the net jobs as most of the foreign direct investment, I believe, has, though I have not had the opportunity to read this study, and I will do so, and would appreciate if I could get a copy of that study. But generally, we focus on helping attract this investment that has all this ripple effect, net positive activity for our economy.
Let me get one more question. The Bureau of Economic Analysis at the Department of Commerce is responsible for measuring foreign direct investment. BEA used to carry out a survey of businesses that differentiated between growth in greenfield investment and investment growth from merger and acquisition. In 2008, it had to cancel the survey for budget reasons, but the President's 2014 budget proposes to reinstate it. I want to get quickly here. The GAO and NBER and the National Academy of Public Administration have each recommended that BEA expand its foreign direct investment data and have provided specific recommendations to the Bureau on what parts of its efforts would be most valuable to expand. So I commend the Department of Commerce for seeking to resume this collection. Yes or no, should the Congress appropriate funding for this survey differentiating between greenfield investment and investment through acquisitions?
As I said, Representative Schakowsky, I've not read this study, though it sounds like you make a compelling argument for taking a hard look at this, since we have done it in the past through our Bureau of Economic Analysis. And we certainly work closely with the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and I would certainly work closely with them to get this information either through their efforts or through other appropriate efforts.
It seems to me that regardless of the policy decision we make as a consequence, that having this information would inform how we move forward. So I thank you for that.
Thank
I
you.
yield back.
Thank you very much.
Gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. And Ms. Schakowsky was making reference to a trade position that you may be up for. And trade was one of the few things that we were able to handle in a very good bipartisan fashion in the last Congress up here. So good luck in that endeavor, and if I can be of any assistance to you, I would love to. We got the Colombia, Panama, and Korea free trade agreements done last year that they had not been able to do for 6 or 8 years. We also were successful in extending permanent normal trade relations to Russia, which didn't do anything except help our manufacturers. We were already trading with Russia, and a lot of people didn't realize that when Russia went into the WTO last July, that if we didn't change some things and change the old Jackson-Vanik law that dated back to the Cold War era, that we needed to get rid of that so that we could help our manufacturers and farmers here at home. So thank you, and good luck on your endeavor there.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Chairman, would you invite me to come regularly to testify before this committee?
I haven't gotten to that part.
Yeah.
I still
Yeah.
have time.
No, no.
You may want to wait.
Thank you very much.
No.
But what is Select USA's function with regards to state and local development organizations, and to what extent are the federal government's efforts duplicative of the state and regional economic development organizations?
Thank you very much for the question, Congressman. As I mentioned to Congresswoman Schakowsky, Select USA plays a facilitator role, and we're very much a demand-driven organization, demand-driven largely by state and local governments who seek out our assistance. And so, for example, we have done a number of, about 140 consulting engagements with state and local governments, and helping them seek out opportunities, work better with the federal government on foreign direct investment initiatives.
And you've done that through Select USA?
Yes. Select USA, which is, was stood up in June of 2011, and we have worked with state and local governments from the very start. It really is the cornerstone of how Select USA works.
Well, I have a personal friend, a good friend that works for the state of Louisiana. I'm from Missouri, but state of Louisiana in this type of economic development. And my thought was, might be better to allow them to compete and for businesses to handle the promotion and leave the federal government out of it. The federal government's always overreaching, always trying to do too much. We have the sequester going on, and I just question whether this is necessary.
Well, first of all, the state of Louisiana has been a great partner with us. We recently worked on an investment by a South African firm by the name of Sasol that's going to make a very, very important investment in the state of Louisiana. And at the request of the state of Louisiana, we worked very, very closely with them in a number of ways. One thing that we are doing in that particular example is introducing that company to the relevant federal agencies that they're going to have to interact with. So just a few months ago, after the announcement, we put together a meeting with all of the relevant federal agencies at the Department of Commerce. They all came. The CEO of the U.S. subsidiary had a chance to present their project to these federal agencies. So that's one example of how we're working at the request of the state of Louisiana to support their FDI promotion efforts. And again, as I mentioned in an earlier response to a question, through the U.S. Foreign and Commercial Service, we have offices in 72 countries around the world. No state has that kind of reach outside. State of Florida has 14, and that's the most of any state. And we're able to leverage those offices to identify potential companies, potential targets. And we're going to continue to play the facilitator role, not the lead role, but the facilitator role. One more thing, Congressman, is that we're competing against 159 other countries that use the full weight of their efforts, of their governments, to advocate on behalf of investment in their country. And when we are competing, say, against Mexico or Canada or perhaps a country in Europe versus the United States, it really does help to have a federal advocate supporting that investment right here in the United States.
Wouldn't you agree that it'd go a long ways if we tried to make this the best place in the world to do business?
It is, and I'm all for that.
I think we've got some work to do there, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sanchez, I appreciate you coming to my district a year or two ago. It was a very successful event, and we heard a lot of positive feedback from that.
Well, thank you. We did an export promotion event, as I recall.
That's right. I appreciate that. I'm also interested in ensuring that the American firms are able to find local talent to fill skilled labor positions, and I support the Select USA initiative. I'm also curious about any partnerships you may have with educational institutions. Does the initiative include efforts to address deficiencies in our educational system to make sure that our workers are attractive to businesses as they move into this country?
We are very much aware that while we have a very well-educated workforce, we have some gaps in technical training. And although the Department of Commerce does not itself have programs that are focused on education or technical training, we are working very closely with the Department of Labor, with the Department of Education, with the Department of Defense that has programs in place of finding jobs for returning military personnel as well as spouses of military personnel. So we certainly provide feedback and look for ways to work with our federal agencies in identifying ways that we can help with this gap in technical training.
But you don't have relationships with universities, say, or technical schools to give them guidance on what would be useful to employers?
The Department of Commerce certainly interacts regularly with educational institutions, but we defer to our sister agencies who have a more direct role in education, whether it be the Department of Labor or the Department of Education.
Well, you know, you've been around many districts in this country and seen a lot of what the local governments do to attract investment and businesses to come into their communities. Could you give us just a little, couple of the little examples of how that's been helpful or hurtful to the effort of local communities. What some of the things that local communities have done that have been helpful, if you could, and some that have been hurtful. It's just to give us an idea of what might be useful.
Well, I'd say the first thing is just showing up, and that is actually having a presence in the market, letting the world know that they're open for business. They want to attract foreign direct investment, and so those communities and those states that really make this a priority, really put together a robust promotion program, are going to do better. And so I would encourage states to take an active role, and part of the role of Select USA is helping states and helping local communities put together robust export promotion programs.
So, for example, right now, Governor Brown, Governor of California, is in China promoting California as a place to do business, and you're suggesting that that's helpful and positive.
Increasingly, governors and other local leaders are going overseas to attract foreign direct investment, and I think that effort should pay dividends. It seems to, in a number of states, and I'm sure it will pay for California to be active internationally.
What about the negative side? Are there things that some of our local governments are doing that are detrimental to our trade attractiveness?
Well, I believe that just like the United States needs to be attractive, create a good business climate, and generally we do that, at least as evidenced by the indicators of the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, and other indicators. So do local and state, local communities and state governments. So to the extent that they create attractive business climates, they're going to do well, and to the extent that they don't compete as effectively with other communities, and I'd say I'm using the term communities not just within the United States, but they're now competing with communities around the world. So I would say communities need to measure themselves against communities worldwide, and that to me is an important effort for states and communities that want to be serious about attracting investment.
Well, you know, if I was a Beijing businessman and I was breathing the air in Beijing day in and day out, I'd look at the San Francisco Bay Area and say, hey, this is a much cleaner place. I'd like to go there. Is that come into the calculations at all for those folks, do you think?
May I suggest Omaha's air is even cleaner than San Francisco's?
I yield back.
All right, the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Secretary Sanchez, at the risk of ending the kumbaya questioning that have occurred here, I've got two questions that I'm curious where you may be coming from. One, the easier one, perhaps first, is we have numbers of businesses in our district that they're small companies that have been victims of dumping, and Commerce has told them that they can file an action, and they have pursued that, but they find out it's going to cost, for example, in this one, is $1.2 million to file an action. These small companies can't afford $1.2 million to fight that, so they're giving in. And as a result, we're seeing more dumping occurring here in this country. Is there a role for the government, perhaps, to step in for companies that are undervalued or have the inability to come up with $1.2 million to fight? Is there some place that we might be able to help them?
Congressman, I share that frustration. I have under
what's the solution. I don't want the whining, because that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to find what's the solution.
We make every effort to help companies prepare for an anti-dumping petition. Within the budget constraints that we have, within the staffing constraints that we have, we make every effort to provide advice and counsel for them. That has its limits, but we do everything that we can to help small and medium-sized companies that feel that they're being hurt by companies that are dumping. And so within those constraints, we do everything that we possibly can, and I suspect that we're not able to do all that we could
So
or
we
all
really
that we'd
don't
like
have,
to.
other than maybe giving some help, there's no way to pick up that cost for them.
Within the existing budget that we have, we do what we can.
Okay. Second question is further to do with dumping. We know that foreign companies, they don't dump, their dumping doesn't all occur in one. It can be spread out over different businesses, but one company may be, so there's called, as you know, is targeted dumping. This administration has just come out in supporting that, some recent determinations on that, on targeted dumping, particularly about Fufeng Biotechnicals. And that decision, or that report has just come in early March. Are we revisiting that, or is this something that, because we know that Fufeng had 68% of its sales varied among different customers. So they could dump on one and then charge more on another, and that avoided their dumping charge. How can we protect that if the administration is saying, I'll support that? And they have that he has signed off on this on March 4th, said he agrees with that process.
Congressman, I need to review that particular case before I respond on that. I do know that as we do, I believe, a good job within the constraints that we have of enforcing our trade laws, we also do it in compliance with our international obligations. And I would need to, I'd need to look at this a little more carefully, and I'd be happy to do so and get back with you.
I hope you can, because we're seeing, just 20-some years ago, we had a very vibrant steel industry in the northern section of West Virginia with 30,000 steel workers. We now have less than 1,000 steel workers. Now think about that. And that's primarily, they will say up and down the line that this had to do with trade and dumping. And I hear a lot of people talking about trying to help, but I don't see the activity. I don't see where that's really stepped in. People that will look at it, will reconsider that. But in the meantime, nearly 30,000 steelworkers have lost their jobs. And here it is again, where people are saying they can't come up with $1.2 million to fight back against these agreements. And then the administration coming out and saying they're going to support this decision. Just real quick question about that. You can find it. I don't see a number on it, but it was. I'll be glad to give you my copy.
Thank you.
Of this,
I promise to look into it and get back to you.
okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
Mr.
you, Congressman.
McKinley. Mr. Pompeo of Kansas, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. In your written testimony, you expressed that one of the concerns foreign companies often have when considering direct investment is their difficulty entering and exiting at U.S. borders. A major employer in my district, Learjet, has a major foreign direct investment from a company called Bombardier in Canada. They're a great employer in our district. They've done a phenomenal job of taking care of our team in Kansas and building a great airplane. They have a shuttle on which they fly employees back and forth from different facilities in Mexico and Canada. They bring team members. They bring parts back and forth. They've been prevented from flying directly in to Wichita because the Customs and Border Protection folks say they don't have the requisite staff on site. Forces Bombardier to clear customs someplace else late at night. It's very, very challenging and costly, and I think discouraging to them to continue to grow their asset in Kansas. I know the company's worked very hard to try and coordinate with Customs. Our office has tried to do the same. We've engaged your folks, the Ombudsman's office, and that process, but we've had little success, to be honest with you, getting the CBP to become engaged. Thoughts on how that process might be strengthened so that companies that do put their capital at risk in America can get in and out and do the things they need to do to both to be successful in their endeavors, but also to grow jobs in America.
Well, Congressman, first of all, thank you for reaching out to Select USA to let us work on that. Bombardier has been a great source of foreign direct investment. They spend a lot of money here, create a lot of jobs, and I believe we are still working on that case. What I can tell you is that I will personally follow up with our team and also reach out to Customs and Border Patrol and see what options that might exist. I know that over the last several years, they have made a special effort to balance the needs of security at the border with making sure that they don't impede legitimate business. And I applaud them for that effort, and we're going to continue to work with them more broadly on policies that make it easy for businesses like Bombardier to invest here. And I will personally look into this one in particular.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I assume this is happening in districts all across the country, the same issue, and so it's just very important that these folks can get in and do the business they need to do here, or they will ultimately be discouraged from those investments. Changing topics just a little bit. We had a long hearing on the Keystone XL pipeline yesterday. Lots of different views, but I'd be interested in your take. Do you think that this kind of highly visible, highly politicized discouragement of foreign direct investment is being observed by other folks who may want to bring capital to America and has an impact on their decisions to invest here in the country?
Well, Congressman, I think that everything that we do, particularly from an investor's point of view, gets looked at. I will say this, that in general, in this case, I know there are a lot of strong opinions on both sides. One of the good things that we do have going for us is that energy costs here are going down, and that is increasingly becoming an attractive incentive to bring investment to our shores. So we certainly are focusing on ways to highlight that, and it's my hope that we'll continue on that path, and we'll be able to use that as an opportunity to bring more investment here to the U.S.
Great. And last, I appreciate it. I think when companies want to come here and do business and follow our laws and all our processes, that to have an administration just make it so difficult and so political and put them through the ringer, I think the world watches when these things happen, and I don't think it's productive to what it is that you all are trying to accomplish and what we're trying to do here through this legislation this morning. You know, last thing I'll say, so we have a piece of legislation we're debating. It directs this interagency study. I think there's lots of studies out there. I think we all have a pretty good handle on what folks are looking for when they make capital decisions to decide whether to invest here or not. So I'm happy to take a look at this and see what it's going to cost and how much burden it's going to place. But I think we all have a deep recognition of what it is that folks are really looking for when they're trying to figure out where to spend their money and invest. So thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Congressman.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pompeo. And that concludes our questions for you, Secretary Sanchez. I appreciate your time. We tell witnesses after they're finished testifying that we may have written questions that will be submitted to you, and I know I have a few, but they're along the same lines of just trying to gather information to help us guide our efforts here. So if you could respond to those in a timely manner, we would greatly appreciate it.
I look forward to receiving your written questions, and I thank you and the ranking member and the members of this committee for the opportunity to speak on this very important topic, and I appreciate your interest in this. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your efforts. And now we'll take a slight pause as we rearrange chairs for the next panel. I'll just do it on the fly. Thank you, everybody. I want to introduce this panel. We have Nancy McClernand, President and CEO of the Organization of International Investment. Linda Dempsey, Vice President of International Economic Affairs of the National Association of Manufacturers. Matthew Slaughter, Associate Dean for Faculty Tuck School of Business, Dartmouth University. And Celeste Martin Bailey, Dr. Bailey, Senior Fellow of Economic Studies at the Bernard Schwartz Chair of Economic Policy Development with the Brookings Institute. Then last to testify in line would be Celeste Drake with the Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist with the AFL-CIO. And welcome all of you. Thank you for coming here today. And we'll start right away. Each of you will have 5 minutes. At 5 minutes, if you're still talking, I'll lightly tap, and that'll mean summarize. So now, Ms. McClernand, you may begin.
Good morning. Okay. Good morning, Chairman Terry, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. I applaud your leadership in holding this timely hearing on legislation to enhance the nation's ability to attract and retain global investment. The Organization for International Investment is an association exclusively comprised of U.S. subsidiaries of global companies. Our mission is to ensure the United States remains an attractive and the most attractive location for global investment. This hearing comes at a time when the United States is at a crossroads facing serious economic and fiscal challenges. And while the U.S. remains the top location for foreign direct investment, its share of worldwide FDI has dropped significantly over the past decade. This really is a national challenge, one that impacts every state and every congressional district in this country. Simply put, it is no longer enough for the U.S. to merely be open to global investment. We must proactively have a strategy to leverage all the tools within our reach if we hope to remain competitive for high-value FDI. For this reason, my organization and our member companies strongly support the Global Investment in American Jobs Act of 2013. FDI has long been a catalyst for economic growth in this country. U.S. subsidiaries of global companies insource 5.6 jobs to the United States and support an annual payroll of over $400 billion. Their employees earn an average compensation well above the private sector average, pointing to the high-end nature of the activities that they have in this country. These companies are in high-value fields like advanced manufacturing, life sciences, R&D, and engineering, generating the types of jobs and economic activities that enhance U.S. competitiveness. Furthermore, they reinvest heavily in their U.S. operations and spend heavily on new equipment, upgraded facilities, and new construction, all of which demonstrate a long-term commitment to their U.S. operations. I'll give you a few examples. Astellas Pharmaceutical R&D facility in Northbrook, Illinois. Case New Holland exporting union-built tractors from Racine, Wisconsin. Philips Healthcare developing advanced medical imaging technologies in Highland Heights, Ohio. And Rolls-Royce partnering with local Virginia schools to teach STEM education and train manufacturing workers in Prince George County. But in spite of all these vital contributions, the extent of their impact throughout the economy is actually not very widely understood. FDI has traditionally occupied something of a blind spot in U.S. policy. The growing importance of global cross-border investment makes it essential for FDI to play a prominent role in U.S. economic policy in the years ahead. And the potential for additional FDI provides a tremendous opportunity for economic growth in the U.S. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. share of global cross-border investment has dropped. We currently garner about 17%. There is no reason we cannot grab more market share. Additionally, the United Nations estimates that multinational companies are currently sitting on some $5 trillion in cash in the wake of the global economic downturn. We can give those companies a reason to unleash that investment here. While there are no magic formulas, enhancing U.S. competitiveness for FDI will certainly require progress in key macro policy issues, including reforming our tax code, advancing a more expansive free trade agreement, modernizing America's infrastructure, implementing a pro-growth energy policy, and developing a workforce that can compete for the jobs of the future. But importantly, We must also make sure that once the U.S. wins a new investment, that we provide good aftercare, and we ensure that the U.S. subsidiaries of global companies have the ability to succeed and grow their business here on a level playing field with homegrown companies. The U.S. must avoid policies and regulations that disadvantage or discriminate against companies that are headquartered abroad. Given our unique advantages, the U.S. is fully capable of improving its competitive edge for FDI. We have an enormous domestic market, abundant natural resources, strong rule of law, and a culture of innovation and productivity. We need to couple those advantages with a better understanding of what kinds of policies and best practices position the U.S. to successfully recruit global companies. The Global Investment in American Jobs Act seeks to do just that. The legislation recognizes that the U.S. cannot compete for 21st century investment with a 20th century policy mindset. It aims to equip policymakers with a forward-thinking strategic approach to capture new investment in this increasingly competitive yet opportunity-rich global environment. The interagency review and recommendations would provide Congress a roadmap for further action to attract global manufacturers, service providers, and innovators to our shores. If enacted, the legislation will send a powerful message at home and abroad that the U.S. is working to improve its investment climate for FDI in a thoughtful and bipartisan manner. I'd like to thank the subcommittee again for the opportunity to testify and look forward to questions.
Well done. Ms. Dempsey, you are now recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Terry, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and members of the subcommittee. I welcome the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the National Association of Manufacturers, the oldest and largest industrial trade association in the United States. The NAM represents small and large manufacturers in every industrial sector and in all 50 states, including many foreign headquartered companies that manufacture throughout our nation. As this subcommittee knows well, manufacturing is the engine that drives the U.S. economy by creating jobs, opportunity, and prosperity. A robust international trade and investment approach are vital to the success of manufacturing in the United States. In particular, FDI into the United States plays a critical role in growing manufacturing. While fluctuating yearly, foreign investment in manufacturing has shown substantial growth since 2003, with important benefits for the U.S. economy. In 2012, FDI inflows into the United States in manufacturing equaled nearly $83 billion, accounting for nearly half of those inflows. While the United States has remained the largest recipient of FDI through 2012, we've heard from my colleague that global competition for FDI is rising sharply, and the U.S. share of that FDI is on the decline. From the NAM's perspective, we should be working to help grow FDI into the United States, which grows manufacturing and jobs, innovation, and economic opportunities. The NAM's 2013 growth agenda presents 4 goals for a manufacturing resurgence in America. The NAM's first goal is very much the subject of this hearing, to make the United States the best place in the world to manufacture and to attract FDI. The goal of the legislation before this subcommittee is an important one, to spur policy improvements that will help the United States further attract FDI, including through requiring an interagency review of policies and best practices with recommendations for further action. We hope the report will result in concrete proposals and action and encourage the subcommittee to continue working on this legislation and moving it forward. We also recommend that the report consider the recommendations from the President's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness, which called for a national investment initiative. The U.S. open investment policy that this legislation reaffirms is supported through a number of different aspects of U.S. law, regulation, and policy. The United States generally treats FDI on a non-discriminatory basis unless there is a threat to national security, as determined by CFIUS. The U.S. open investment policy is also supported through the U.S. Bilateral Investment Treaty Program, BITS, which began about 4 decades ago. The United States has in place 38 BITS, including most recently with Rwanda, that secure reciprocal and open investment frameworks with interested countries. The BIT program helps secure U.S. investment abroad, which is also focused on reaching consumers and is a huge driver of U.S. exports, as well as R&D and capital expenditures here in the United States. A robust BIT program, which includes the strong investor state enforcement mechanisms, is a vital part of the U.S. open investment policy. Yet, given the increasingly competitive environment for FDI, the United States cannot stand still. From the manufacturing perspective, the United States faces significant challenges of our own making. It is 20% more expensive to manufacture in the United States than in other major industrialized nations. The United States continues to have the highest corporate tax rates among major industrial countries, and 2/3 of all manufacturers pay taxes at the individual rate. To make the United States the best place in the world to manufacture and attract FDI, we urge Congress and the administration more broadly to work together to create a national tax climate to promote manufacturing, embrace an all-of-the-above approach to energy, modernize and invest in infrastructure, ensure that the benefits of regulations justify their costs, implement common-sense legal reform, reduce health care costs, and ensure robust export opportunities for manufacturers in the United States, including through an aggressive trade policy agenda that open markets and provides competitive export financing and works to ensure that our trading partners protect intellectual property and play by the rules. By addressing the multitude of these policies that shape global competitiveness, the United States will be able to increasingly attract and retain the kind of foreign investment to sustain and grow manufacturing here in America. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Mr. Slaughter, you are now recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Terry, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and fellow members. Thank you very much for inviting me to testify on these important and timely issues of how global investment can contribute to American jobs and overall economic strength. In my remarks, I will stress that although the U.S. subsidiaries of global companies have long made large contributions to U.S. jobs and overall economic strength, the past need not be prologue. There are recent worrisome trends that America's attractiveness to these companies may be waning. To support the U.S. economy amidst a still fragile labor market and overall recovery, policymakers should strive to sustain an environment in which global firms can thrive here. Research for the United States and many other countries has long documented that globally engaged companies tend to perform better than purely domestic companies do. The U.S. subsidiaries of global companies, despite accounting for far less than 1% of all U.S. businesses, perform large shares of America's productivity-enhancing activities that lead to high average compensation for American workers. For the most recent year of data available, 2010, or as of this morning, 2011, contributions of these companies included the following: 5.8% of all private sector output, over 14% of all non-residential private sector capital investment, almost 18% of U.S. exports of goods, and over 14% of the total research and development performed by all U.S. companies. All these activities contribute to millions of well-paying jobs in America. In 2011, these U.S. affiliates employed 5.6 million workers, 5% of total private sector employment. In 2010, their total compensation averaged over $77,000 per worker, more than a third above the average for the rest of the private sector. Of these jobs, nearly 2 million were in manufacturing, and the U.S. subsidiaries of global companies have long had relatively high unionization rates. In 2007, over 12% of these firms' U.S. employees were covered by collective bargaining, versus just about 8% for all private sector workers. And finally, U.S. subsidiaries of global companies support U.S. jobs through their supply chains. In 2010, these subsidiaries purchased almost $2 trillion in intermediate inputs from other U.S. companies. Despite these strengths of the past, over the first dozen years of the 21st century, two worrisome trends emerged regarding the presence and dynamism of U.S. subsidiaries of global companies. First, although many of their non-employment activities continued to grow, their U.S. employment did not. There were about the same number of Americans working in these companies in 2011 as in 2002. The second worrisome trend is that the U.S. share of global foreign direct investment has fallen sharply. The U.S. share of the world stock of FDI fell from over 41% in 1999 to only about 17% in 2009. Taken together, these two worrisome trends of the past decade suggest that the U.S. economy has become a less attractive location for global companies to establish and expand their operations. And these trends have emerged while a steadily rising share of the leading global companies are headquartered outside of America. The options that the world presents to global companies have expanded dramatically in recent years, due to policy liberalization and related accelerated economic growth in so many countries. The United States cannot rest on past success and take the U.S. engagement of these global companies for granted. A vigorous, optimistic future for inward investment in America is very possible, but achieving this optimistic future will require crafting new U.S. policies to boost FDI inflows and the related employment and other productivity-enhancing activities of these companies. An important first policy step would be for the Secretary of Commerce to oversee an interagency review and report of America's global competitiveness in attracting FDI, as specified in the Global Investment in American Jobs Act of 2013. The baseline information from this report would provide an excellent guide to refining U.S. economic policies and promotion, and ultimately U.S. economic performance. Let me here recommend a second important policy step: higher quality U.S. government data. U.S. government statistics currently do not capture the full extent and evolution of the U.S. operations of global companies. This is in no way a fault of the dedicated public servants working at these statistical agencies. Rather, it simply reflects the fact that many of the business surveys conducted and analyzed by these agencies were created decades ago in ways that today fail to encompass the modern and ever-evolving complexity of business in America. Here in the 21st century, if we want to best craft U.S. economic policies to support American workers and their families, then we need to find a way to update and expand many of our key economic statistics on how these global companies work. Thank you again for your time and your interest in my testimony, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you. And Dr. Bailey, you are now recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Terry and Ranking Member Chakowski and the other members of the committee for the opportunity to present my testimony today. I'd like to submit the full statement for the record, if I may. There are a couple of typos in it that I'd like to correct before it gets submitted, which I've just discovered. I do think that making America the location that attracts good foreign companies is a very important task. And I think really the same things that attract foreign companies will encourage American multinational companies to invest more in the United States. And as one of the earlier panelists noted, there's a lot of money sitting out there that we would love to see invested here to improve the recovery. There have been quite a few numbers already put out here, and I'm going to just comment on, rather than reprise what's in my testimony, I just comment on a couple of them. One is, I think, it is obviously a concern if our share of FDI is going down. I think there is a certain thought that it's inevitable with emerging economies growing. They are much poorer than we are. They're growing faster than we are. There's going to be more investment taking place in those economies than in the U.S. So I don't think we should get down on ourselves too much if we find that investment elsewhere is growing relative to the U.S. I think that's just part of life. And the second point I'd make is to note that really a lot of the investment that comes from overseas is going into manufacturing. I think that's important. We've heard that the manufacturing sector is important. It's an area where we maybe haven't had enough domestic investment. We'd like to see more. We want exports to grow. We want to get a more balanced trade picture for the United States. So I think it's particularly helpful that foreign investment comes into the U.S. One thing, though, to remember, since it is in a lot of the investment is concentrated in manufacturing, and since manufacturing employment generally has been on a rather declining trend as a fraction of total employment, we're going to see that the employment in foreign companies in the United States is not necessarily going to look as good as investment in some other industries, just because of the industry that they tend to be in. And again, I don't think that's something that we're necessarily going to change, because manufacturing is an area with a lot of productivity growth, a lot of automation, and so employment growth tends to be slower there or declining there relative to other industries. The other point I'd notice on the investment is that so much of it comes from Europe, and Japan really are friends and allies, and I think that does make a difference in the way we think about it. Many of these companies are used to operating with environmental regulations. They're used to operating with fair labor standards and so on. And so I think a lot of the companies that are coming in, such as from Germany, from Switzerland, and so on, these by and large are going to be good neighbor companies in terms of what they do and the practices that they have. I say a little bit in the testimony about pros and cons. Since I've only got 2 minutes left, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think might be the best ways to make the United States more competitive. The first thing I'll say is we need to get the macroeconomics right. I know that's it's a hard concept to get across, but I think as long as we have a shortage of national saving over national investment in our economy, we're going to be running trade deficits because one is the counterpart of the other. So while I don't want to balance the budget tomorrow, I think that would be disastrous in a weak recovery. I do think that's something we need to do over the next 10 years. We have to make room for more export growth, more manufacturing growth, and one way to do that is to get a better balance between saving and investment. Second point I'd make is on trade agreements, and I think that's something where, you know, it would be great to work on a multilateral basis. If not, we do need to work, as I think you've said here, on bilateral agreements. That's where one of the typos is. One of the major German auto companies that has invested in the United States to serve the U.S. market has decided to locate one of its other plants in Mexico because that's a location where they're going to export from primarily, and they feel they have better trade agreements operating in Mexico than they would in the United States. So I think that's a sign that we need to do more on the trade agreement side if a company that, say, wants to export into Latin America decides to locate in Mexico rather than in the U.S. On the corporate income tax, I agree with the sentiment generally. I think, you know, again, we need to get more tax revenue from somewhere. I don't see how we're going to balance the budget over 10 years if we don't get more tax revenue. But we have to recognize that corporations are mobile. We have to be in step with other countries around the world, both in terms of what our marginal tax rate is and whether or not we tax companies on their foreign earnings or whether we tax them on the activities that they do here in the United States. So I think basically we need to get our corporate tax in line with where our competitors is. We mentioned, I'm running out of time here, but just quickly, I think we do need to do a bit more to improve the skills of our workforce. There are good community colleges that are doing that. The Department of Defense has shown some tremendous ability to give their soldiers skills in short periods of time. So I think there's a lot of things we can do in terms of vocational training and technical training to improve the quality of our workforce. And it's not that the workers are bad, it's just that they don't have some of the skills that they need. And then finally, I'll mention taking advantage of the energy boom, and that's been mentioned here already. I think this has been a massive change, a game changer for the U.S. economy, this discovery of energy sources. I think there are environmental concerns about it, absolutely. But I think we can meet those concerns and have cheaper energy, cheaper natural gas, which will really increase the attractiveness of the United States, both for domestic companies and for foreign companies.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bailey. And Ms. Drake, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Terry, Ranking Member Schakowsky, members of the committee. Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of the AFL-CIO on the critical issues of economic development and job creation. I have submitted written testimony for the record and will highlight a few key points here. Any discussion of where our economy is going should begin with the discussion of where we've been. Between the Great Depression and 1980, America's economic strategy centered on policies designed to ensure a virtuous cycle of rising productivity, rising wages, and increased public and private investment that led to even greater productivity. Regulatory policy was critical to this strategy, including food, product, and workplace safety, a strong minimum wage, and the National Labor Relations Act, giving workers the right to organize and bargain collectively. This national strategy led to the period of the highest sustained economic growth in American history and gave birth to the modern American middle class. Since 1980, the United States has embraced a different economic strategy, one that has reversed the prior pattern of shared prosperity. We have sought to maintain our status as the world's largest consumer market, while at the same time seeking to compete globally by lowering our labor costs. As part of this approach, the overall direction of regulatory policy since 1980 has weakened worker protections to reduce labor costs, left consumers and investors at the mercy of bad actors on Wall Street, and even promoted consolidation instead of competition in certain sectors. The result has been, not surprisingly, a series of financial bubbles and skyrocketing consumer debt. As the committee looks to increase foreign direct investment as one of the many tools we can deploy to help restore the American dream, the AFL-CIO would like to be a partner in that effort. We welcome foreign investment, as you do, but we caution that the review proposed in the discussion draft of the Global Investment in American Jobs Act of 2013 should be performed carefully, lest its recommendations prove more harmful than helpful. While we welcome the changes made from last year's version of the bill, we continue to have serious concerns. For example, by not excluding from the review laws and regulations of general applicability, it is possible that those performing the review will consider financial services policies, such as Dodd-Frank, or important worker protections, including occupational health and safety rules, as mere barriers to investment. Instead, we suggest that the review regard them as important to providing a good investment climate that includes a stable financial system and healthy and productive workforce. As you know, the U.S. is a premier destination for foreign investment. In comparison to other countries in which investors are required to create joint ventures for nearly every investment or pressured to transfer important technology or intellectual property, the U.S. has a very open system. There are, of course, a few important limitations on foreign ownership and control, such as those in the aviation and communication sectors. Again, the AFL-CIO encourages the committee to ensure the review takes a balanced look at these limitations and consider their very important public purposes before simply categorizing them as barriers to investment. These policies are designed with important purposes, including national security and domestic economic growth. In some cases, they may even encourage investment as foreign enterprises seek to become American enterprises to expand their reach. Which brings me to a final caveat. The AFL-CIO urges the committee to ensure that the review recognize that while FDI can contribute to the creation and maintenance of high-skill, high-paying jobs, such an outcome is not inevitable. State-owned and controlled enterprises, in particular, may not invest with the goal to operate in the U.S. for the long term, but instead could acquire strategic technology that could, at worst, jeopardize our national security. They may also engage in predatory or anti-competitive behavior that our trade remedies cannot reach due to their operations here. Or they may operate their businesses in ways that could reduce average wages, benefits, and working conditions instead of lifting them up. Given these risks, we also encourage the committee to consider reversing the current policy of providing foreign investors with extraordinary legal rights through FTAs and investment treaties. In sum, we look forward to working with you to promote the growth of the American economy through investment that creates high-wage, high-benefit jobs that restore the path to the middle class. I thank the committee for its time and would be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Drake. And now we go to the question part of our hearing. And so my first question will be to Ms. McLernon, Ms. Dempsey. Well, we'll just go right down the panel. Give me your opinion in helping us prioritize. What is the most significant barrier / incentive that is either blocking or helping foreign investment in the United States? In essence, what's the low-hanging fruit? McLernon.
Great question. So I think what's really important about this bill is that it seeks to uncover those very things. We mentioned all the macro issues here today that in general can provide a better business opportunity. But our policies over the long haul don't really take a look at the impact that they will have on companies that are not headquartered outside the United States. What type of impact it will have on them that does not have on companies that are headquartered here. Mr. Pompeo talked about something that was simple in terms of getting executives in and out. But there are also more direct hits in terms of government contracting, access to grants. We want a level playing field for these companies, and as I said, not to just win the investment, but ensure once they're here that they have every opportunity to succeed. And sometimes that discrimination is direct and obvious, but many times it's inadvertent. And what I think that this legislation and what this study can do is it puts investment policy front brain. We can think about these things before policies are enacted so that we don't have to go and patch things up afterwards in order to make it okay for a foreign company to be here.
Thank you. I agree a lot with my colleague on the FDI side, but I think we cannot lose sight, as this legislation does not, that there are business climate issues that affect both domestic and foreign manufacturers. And this legislation, I think, will be important, frankly, to both. Some of these issues will be foreign investors looking at the U.S. market. But there are other issues that will impact, I think, manufacturing more broadly in the United States and are relevant.
Mr. Slaughter?
I echo the previous two comments. I'd add, I think one of the most immediate things the U.S. could do to improve the investment climate would be reform our tax code. On a lot of indicators, we have one of the highest burden tax codes in the world, both in terms of the statutory effective tax rates and the complexity of our tax code. So I would put that at the top of the list.
Mr. Bailey?
The three things that I hear most from companies are, number one, that they have to spend a lot of money on training and skills, so that they would like to see a better job. And that's obviously a state and local function to an extent. The second is taxes, which you've mentioned. And again, it's not that our corporate tax collects a whole lot of revenue, but I think the complexity and the marginal tax rates are a concern. And then the third thing I hear is really the complexity of sort of permissions and environmental rules. And it's not, I want to make clear, I don't want to dismantle our environmental rules.
No.
But the speed of getting permissions, the ability to coordinate across agencies and between the federal and state and local government makes for a lot of complexity and a lot of delay. And that's what I hear as a concern.
Ms. Drake?
Thank you. We think one of the main things inhibiting investment here is the misperception that it's too expensive to invest in manufacture in the United States. And we hear this from firms that have reshored and explained that they thought it was going to be so much cheaper to invest and produce elsewhere. And when they really looked at the numbers and the extra costs of producing elsewhere and shipping back to the United States, they found that it's a good deal and there's a good value here. So I would echo what Undersecretary Sanchez said about getting the word out and doing promotion.
Okay. Ms. Dempsey, well, I'll tell you what, we can't answer this in 50 seconds. So I'll put my rest of my questions in written form to you all. And at this time, I will recognize Jan Schakowsky for her questions.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Ms. Drake, a portion of your testimony is rights provided to foreign investors should not exceed rights of domestic investors. Can you elaborate on exactly what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So a foreign investor, if the foreign investor is from a country with which the United States has an FTA, a free trade agreement, or a BIT, a bilateral investment treaty, has certain legal rights through the investment chapter and through the process guaranteed by the investment chapter, which is investor-state dispute settlement, to have a complaint that may have reduced the expected profit or somehow didn't provide what the international law calls a minimum standard of treatment, and skip domestic courts. So skip state courts and federal Article III constitutional courts. Go to an international arbitration panel and pursue this challenge. And it's in some ways similar to a Fifth Amendment takings challenge under the Constitution, but it's got a broader definition of what property is. It's got a broader definition of what a takings would be. And we hear from small domestic manufacturers that they simply can't challenge their complaints about local, state, and federal regulations and laws in the same way. And they feel that all investors in the United States should have to go through the same system that respects our democratic process and democratically enacted laws and regulations.
Let me ask just a broader question. Then how would you revise, including, I imagine, taking what you just said into account, the current draft of the Global Investment in American Jobs Act to achieve the goals that'll not only attract foreign investment, but also look at our domestic workers?
For that particular issue, we would add a provision that asks the Department of Commerce to really look at the FTAs and bits that we've made, and whether the extraordinary legal rights given to foreign investors somehow inhibit or discourage domestic industries and make an unlevel playing field. So just with that addition of something to look at, we think it could be very useful.
In your testimony, Dr. Bailey, you draw a distinction between greenfield investment and investment that stems from merger and acquisition. I asked Secretary Sanchez about that too. Do you think there would be merit in the following one? BEA once again conducting a survey that distinguishes between greenfield investment, to having the review and report in the draft bill under consideration take this difference into account?
I would certainly like to see that additional data. I think it would be very helpful. So yes, I would. I do think that there are advantages that you can get from takeovers. There are obviously some takeovers you don't want, and you mentioned those about proprietary technology and so on. You have to be careful. But in many cases, a company that gets taken over may have been in difficulty. The new company may bring in investment, and we've seen that in the steel industry and in other places. So I'm not against takeovers necessarily, but I agree it'd be helpful to know what the data says.
There was one other section, Ms. Drake, that was of interest to me that had to do with Chinese company and somehow our not inability, but making it difficult for CFIUS to actually secure the information that we need to make sure that information they get from American companies isn't used in the wrong way and counter to CFIUS rules. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
CFIUS actually has a very small mandate, and it doesn't really look at greenfield investment. It doesn't look at equipment sales contracts. And so there are various ways that it may not be catching all of the investments or equipment purchases or other contracts here that could have an impact on our national security. So consistent with some recommendations made by the U.S.-China Economic and Security Commission and even the Heritage Foundation, which you won't find me quoting a lot, we would recommend that the committee take a look at possibly expanding the mandate of CFIUS so that they can really look at all of the potential investments that they need to, not with an eye of stopping FDI at all, but just to make sure that we're protecting our national security and economic security in the way that we need to.
Things that have dual purpose, for example?
Yes, there was an example in my written testimony of AVIC acquiring Nextier, and it's this steering technology that also has a military purpose, and that transaction's already gone through, but there is some question now about the technology being transferred to China. Will it be used for military purposes? And the information seems to all be in China, and there's no way at this point to really know if will be used against the United States in a military way or it won't be.
Okay, I thank you for your testimony and your suggestions.
Thank you. At this time, recognize the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Lance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Dean Slaughter, in your testimony, you indicate that there are two worrisome trends. First, although many related to non-employment activities, U.S. employment did not. It flatlined from 2002 to 2010, and then dipped from 2007 to 2010. Would you elaborate briefly to us on that?
Sure. So over much of the past 10 to 20 years before the decade of the 2000s, the presence of the U.S. affiliates of foreign multinational companies had grown on a lot of dimensions, employment being an important one. Employment had almost doubled over about a 15-year period. But employment has not been growing, and I think, again, from the broad policy perspective that I think many of us share of trying to have good jobs at good wages, one of the really important things is these global companies tend to have a whole nexus of productivity-enhancing things, of investing a lot in human resources, investing a lot in capital, new ideas through R&D. So those tend to be good jobs at good wages. And so thinking about, per the topic of this hearing, policies that could try to allow that employment to increase would be great.
And Ms. Drake, might you respond to that as well? I'd certainly be interested in the position of your great organization.
Thank you very much. The data on, for instance, the high wage rates paid by foreign investors is really good information. We would like to see further expansion to get down into the weeds on that information, because foreign investment, approximately, it's roughly 40% of all foreign investment is in manufacturing.
Yes.
Manufacturing tends to have higher wages anyway. And in the U.S. economy overall, there's only about 10% of the employment is in manufacturing. So I think there are some deeper questions about whether it's really bringing wages up, and if it is, we should do everything that we can to promote it. But if we find that in certain sectors, foreign investment is negatively affecting wages and benefits, we should look at that and see if we can do anything in a policy way to turn that around so that all foreign direct investment would be good for workers and bringing wages and benefits up.
What sectors in particular are you referring?
Well, one particular concern is auto manufacturing, and there's been a trend for foreign auto manufacturers to hire a lot of temp workers. And there's an article from the Washington Post that I'd like to submit for the record that talks about this use of temp workers. And what it's done is it pushes, it makes it less competitive than for existing American auto manufacturers to not do the same thing. So there are competitive forces on wages, and we want those competitive forces to be bringing wages up rather than down.
Dean Slaughter, would you comment?
I just echo Ms. Drake in the concern about measurement, but some of the best academic and policy work that has been done on this shows that when you control for industry, you control for location in the U.S. of manufacturing plants that are part of multinational companies, they tend to pay consistently about 10 to 15% more, and not just for the non-production workers, but for the production workers as well. Measurement on these things is always really important, and more data would be great, but there's a lot of evidence that these wages are high.
And then, Dean Slaughter, you say, secondly, a worrisome trend is that the U.S. share of global FDI has fallen sharply, and we're working in a bipartisan way on this issue. Could you elaborate briefly on that aspect of your testimony?
Sure. I'd pick up on something that Dr. Bailey said, which is, I think as there's faster economic growth in China and India and a lot of parts of the world, I think it's inevitable that that faster growth will bring some decline in the U.S. share of world FDI flows.
Yes.
But what's striking is how much more dramatic the fall in FDI shares for the U.S. have been compared to our share of GDP or other economic measures. And so that gets to the need to have a policy environment that supports the growth of these companies here.
And this is a relatively new trend only in the last decade, your second point, and that's why we're trying to work through this issue in a bipartisan capacity?
Yes. So in the 90s, it was the opposite.
And was that due to the stronger economy in our country in the 1990s, in your judgment?
So that had a lot to do with it. We had a strong productivity boom in the second half of the 1990s, and that overall strong growth in jobs and incomes was part of what attracted these companies here.
And might I respectfully suggest that was due to bipartisan cooperation, a Democratic president, and Republican control of the House in the late 1990s.
Do it again.
Absolutely.
I hope that's possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. Let's see, Mr. Long.
I'm hard to miss. What do you mean, let's see?
Yeah, I meant to get out of the way.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Drake, you just mentioned temporary workers, hiring a lot of temporary workers. Describe to me what a temporary worker is.
A temporary worker is hired through a temp agency, and there are many of them very large in the United States. And the temp agency is then the actual employer of record responsible for the wages and taxes and benefits of that worker. And they can be on a short term, when these agencies started, it was your secretary's sick, you need a temp for the day. As this Washington Post article describes, and it's not just foreign employers that are doing that. It's
What date
an economy-wide
What
trade.
date was that came out?
Oh, this is an older article. It's Monday, October 11th, 2004. But this is still the pattern. Temporary workers can be hired
I
from
think I was
anything
still
to.
in high school.
That makes you younger than me. They can be hired for 30 days, 90 days. Some are temps for 2 years or longer in many places. And it makes it, typically the temps are paid less, have lower benefits than the permanent workers, and their goal is to someday be hired on as a permanent employee.
Okay. I'm actually, if my ciphering's right, 4 or 5 months older than the AFL-CIO. So I am, we both were, came along in the same year. As far as I had a constituent come to me week before last, I believe, maybe 2 weeks ago. I was home, and they said, we're coming to see Roy Blunt, our senator, we're coming to see Claire McCaskill, our senator, and we're coming to see you because we want you to understand, Congressman, how onerous this Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, whatever you want to call it, I don't think Obamacare is a pejorative anymore or ever was or whatever because the president calls it that. But anyway, let's call it Obamacare. And they say, well, we want you to know what this is doing. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, we have 53,000. This is a local employer. Obviously, they have tentacles across the United States, have places of business in several states. So we have 53,000 employees. And the best we can decide is we're going to have to take those employees and go not have anyone over a 30-hour-a-week employee. Is this of concern to you at the AFL-CIO? That are you hearing these type of things about complying with Obamacare and how we're going to get it done by 2014?
I don't work in the healthcare department, but we from what I know of, we are not hearing those complaints. We are concerned that those complaints are being made. We think that the Affordable Care Act was a bipartisan compromise. I know there were a lot of Republican ideas incorporated into the bill, and every attempt was made to make it affordable for employers, for workers, for the country. And we would hope that employers would do their best to provide the health care for their workers through the system in the ACA so that they have healthy, productive workers. So we wouldn't want to prejudge that it's going to be something that's unaffordable or is not going to work. We strongly believe the opposite.
I had you define temporary worker for me, but I don't think I'm going to ask you to define bipartisan because we might have a different understanding of that if Obamacare was a bipartisan effort. But I want to read from a article in the Wall Street Journal. It wasn't back in 2004. It was day before yesterday. A labor union representing roofers is reversing course and calling for the repeal of the federal health care law, citing concerns the law will cost its cost for insuring members. Organized labor was instrumental in getting the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010, but more recently has voiced concerns that the law could lead members to losing their existing health plans, which is what my constituent told me. He said, Billy, we provided much better health care. Now we're going to have to cut everyone back to a temporary status or less hours. The United Union of Roofers, Waterproofers, and Allied Workers is believed to be the first union to initially support the law and later call for its repeal. And on the Republican side, we have tried several different ways, which debatable whether those will work or not whenever you vote 32 different ways to defund the act and do away with it when you don't have the White House and you don't have the Senate. But now that it's gotten through the Supreme Court and they've ruled and that it's the law of the land and it's coming to fruition, I'm just going to ask you to be on guard, because when you start having people that employ 53,000 people telling these stories, and they're not uncommon. This is not some far out there, somebody in a tinfoil hat. I hear it tapping. Tinfoil hat. That
and it's not hearing things.
Is dreaming these things up. So, in all honesty, I think that we're going to have. I think this is just going to compound until we find out that we at least need to delay implementation at the least. When you have roofing unions that supported the thing saying it's not doable. So Not trying to pick on you, but I'm just the AFL-CIO. I want to see what you're hearing. So, and thank you all for your testimony here today.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Ms. Drake, you suggested an article be entered into the record. Was that already part of your statement that is part of the record?
It was not.
Okay, so ordered.
Thank you very much.
At this point, the gentleman from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In Ms. Schakowsky's early remarks, she was talking about the jobs in our manufacturing and how important it is for our middle class. And if you were here during my comments with Secretary Sanchez, was the concern about the loss of our steel industry in northern West Virginia. We have indeed, both of those were owned, they were foreign investments, major foreign investments, and both of them, one of the prime reasons that we lost both of those 30,000 jobs was because of trade. So I'm just curious, maybe Ms. Dempsey, maybe you can, and Ms. Drake, you can ply into this, but in some consideration to try to encourage more further investment in America, how conceivable would it be, and what would be the effect for people considering investment if they found out, if they were made aware that through a trade agreement or a trade settlement that a company is found to be coming in inappropriately, putting a business out. So I understand that money, those penalties now go to the U.S. Treasury. What would be the message if we could put it in this bill or in this study to see that that money goes back to the individual companies that are aggrieved? And not only the companies that are aggrieved, but also to the employees that have lost their job as a result of this. I think it's far more helpful to our middle class if we're helping the people that have been hurt rather than the federal government getting the largesse of that. What would be the effect of that, do you think, if investors knew that their companies would be protected?
Perhaps I can start, Congressman. Thank you. I started my career as a trade remedy lawyer, bringing cases for the last U.S. fan manufacturer here in the United States for the U.S. steel industry in the 1990s. And these are important issues. And we at the NAM take enforcement of our own trade laws just as importantly as we take enforcement of other countries' obligations in trade agreements and everywhere else. The issue you raise about where the disbursement of the funds goes is something that had been tried in the United States, and we lost a WTO ruling on this. It is not something that is viewed in the international rules as a way forward. I will say that I believe that the strong enforcement you generally see in the United States for our trade remedy laws, not that it's perfect, but the strong enforcement is something that attracts companies here, that they know that there is a better chance that they will be operating on a level playing field, that the competition from imports will be on a level playing field. The one issue we've heard the most, though, from our companies right now is an issue that's before the Ways and Means Committee, which is if there's circumvention of those anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders, they take too long to get enforced. And so we support something like called the Enforce Act so that those rules are enforced. But the issue of the payments back is a complicated one. I think there are other things in terms of domestic manufacturing we need to do to improve the opportunities for those companies as well as the manufacturing community writ large.
Can I make a quick comment on that? Would you give me 30 seconds? No, you want to talk to
After her.
Excuse me.
Thank you. I think your idea on remedies is a good one, and as the AFL-CIO tends to disagree with many of the structures set down by the WTO, so maybe that's something that can be addressed with WTO reform. To get to your earlier question to Undersecretary Sanchez about who can bring a case and is there adequate assistance for cases, we would support a broader definition that cities and communities could bring cases, that workers could work together with cities and communities and the employers to get the resources needed, because these cases are very expensive. And we would support the Department of Commerce providing additional assistance beyond what they're currently doing. And I think one other thing with regard to your dumping concerns, with these state-owned enterprises investing and operating in the United States, it's possible that they're getting subsidized inputs, tax rebates, no-cost financing, so that they could be here essentially producing what would be a dumped product if they made it in their home market, but they're producing it here, and our current trade remedy laws can't reach them. Additionally, there's been some recent investments by Chinese state-owned corporation, Sinopec, for instance, an oil investment. And I'm not a practicing trade remedy lawyer, but I spoke to some before this hearing, and it's not clear that if they import what would be dumped product to themselves, that our trade remedy laws could get at that, because if it's within the same company, it may not enter commerce, and it may not be subject to our anti-dumping laws. So there's a lot of interesting things to look at here in order to make sure that competition is level and balanced, and that domestic companies and domestic jobs are really strengthened rather than put at risk.
Thank you.
I would request respectfully an additional unanimous consent for an additional minute so that Mr. Bailey can answer.
Thank you so much. While it's clear that we need to enforce our trade laws, and it is true that trade has been an important issue in the steel industry, with all due respect, I would say that I doubt if the loss of all those 30,000 jobs is really attributable to trade, because if you look at a steel plant today compared to one some years ago, now you see, 4 people and some computer monitors, whereas before you saw lots of people down on the production line. It's become a very automated company that doesn't hire a lot of people. And the second thing is that we've had a terrible recession, so that the demand for steel is just, it really collapsed in the recession. It's coming back now, but I don't think it's where it was. So I think there are some domestic issues also associated with some of those jobs.
Well, when China's producing 6 times the amount of steel that we had, and just a few years ago we were both producing the same quantity of steel, it tells me something's going on in China, whether it's currency manipulation or what.
Thank you, Mr. McKinley. And now Mr. Johnson of Ohio is recognized for our 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bailey, before I ask my question, I'm not sure. I live in steel country, as Mr. McKinley does. I don't know what steel plants you go to where you got 4 or 5 people running computers that produce steel. That's not the way it's produced along the Ohio River in the plants that are in my district. You've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that are employed in those. But let me get to my question. I believe in, I like trade also. I believe in fair trade. The idea of free trade to me is it's a vernacular that troubles the American people. You say the term free trade, it conjures up ideas of Chinese ships pulling up to docks and offloading technology and products that disadvantage our workers back here at home. I've advocated for a while changing the vernacular to talk about export optimization agreements rather than free trade agreements, because that's really what we're trying to get to. We make it here, we innovate here, we sell it there. So with that in mind, you recommend that the U.S. enter more free trade agreements. Where do we stand relative to similarly situated nations in terms of the number of trade agreements in force?
I'll make a quick comment, and then I'm going to defer to my friend Matt Slaughter, who can probably give you a much better answer than I can. Yes, to say it's only 4 people, obviously that was a bit of an exaggeration, but productivity really has gone up.
Oh, I agree with that. I agree with that.
And you got the electric arc furnaces and so on.
I'm sorry, I've got 5 minutes, so let's go to the free trade questions.
So let me defer the answer to the free trade question, if I may, to Dean Slaughter.
The U.S. has about 20 free trade agreements in force with other countries in the world. Many of them are older. Many of them are, no disrespect to our trading partners, with relatively small countries, for which, your insight about export optimization, they're not large markets. So part of how we ideally get out of the world financial crisis is build more jobs and activity in America linked to selling things to the rest of the world. I think there's tremendous opportunity for the United States to expand the free trade access that we have to a number of other growing countries.
And in terms of increasing exports, right?
Absolutely.
yeah,
Imports have a
we're
lot of
on-
value as well, but absolutely on growing
We're on the same page. The administration is currently engaged in TPP negotiations and plans to enter negotiations with the EU this summer. Are there other glaring omissions other than TPP and EU in our stable of free trade agreements, in your mind?
Sure. One I'll add, I guess, is we can think about organizing them along country lines, but industry lines as well. So if we think about manufacturing, definitely matters for the United States, but we have a lot of large and growing industries and services for which there's a lot of barriers in trade and investment around the world. So as a complement to think about negotiating with countries, I think there's great value in thinking about finding industries in which a lot of Americans work throughout a lot of districts where we could open up foreign markets.
Sure. Dr. Bailey, you also testified that we should take advantage of the natural gas energy boom, and I certainly agree with that. Much of that steel manufacturing that I talked about in eastern and southeastern Ohio is a result of that. If production were to slow or to be stopped altogether in oil and natural gas, in your opinion, how would that impact our ability to attract or retain FDI?
It feels a little like a leading question, but I think there's no question as to the answer, which is
Good.
that if
She
it were...
mentioned lawyers earlier. Lawyer doesn't ask a question they already don't know the answer to, right? So.
But it certainly would make U.S. less attractive for investment for both domestic companies and foreign companies.
Great, great. What do you think? What do you think as it relates to trade, as it relates to manufacturing? If you could name 3 things that we should do to bring manufacturing back here to America. I met with a bunch of labor folks this morning that are concerned about their jobs being outsourced. If there were anything that we could do, 2 or 3, what would be the top 3 things that you would recommend we do to improve our position where a trade is concerned and bring and retain manufacturing?
Well, Chairman Terry asked a somewhat similar question, and I think I would give the same answer here. I think we do need to do more to make sure we have the skills in the production workers. We have the finest universities in the world, but many, particularly of our young men, are not going to
school. Workforce development.
Workforce development. Number 2 is harmonizing our corporate tax with the rest of the world so that it's less complex and the marginal rate is lower.
We're on board.
And then the third is around, as I said, I'm strongly in favor of our environmental standards. We need those, and I'm concerned about global warming, but we need to make sure that you can get permissions and there's coordination between the states and the federal government and among federal agencies, and that process can move more quickly.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and that concludes the members from asking questions. No one's left. So I want to thank all of our panelists for your incredible testimony and help today. It really has been a great assistance to us. Gave us more to think about, including Ms. Drake, where I think you turned around a few conceptions. We were under the impression that we should be exempting from any consideration labor laws, and I think you're suggesting that we need to have the discussion in this. So we'll have to vet through that, which means we also have the opportunity to ask written or submit written questions to you, which my members will have only 10 days to get to you. So that's my admonition to my colleagues, is they have 10 days to get their questions put together. We would appreciate a quick turnaround in your answers for those questions. And at that concludes this hearing.